Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by RedThread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories, Ashley.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're thrilled to have you here. Stacia and I, when we started thinking about how we wanted to change this podcast, you were the very first person on our list. Part of it is the very, very smart things you say, but the other part of it is that you have a sardonic wit that just is amazing, both in your writing. I was noticing it in the writing of your book as well as our conversations. So we're glad to have you here today.
I hope I don't disappoint. Now I'm going to have to try and think about what sardonic means the whole time.
It's not an old short word, Danny.
How about biting? You have a biting wit.
No, that seems mean.
That does seem mean. That's why I use sardonic.
Okay, let's go with sardonic. Yes, I'll try and be sardonic.
I've used dry. Dry
There you
Dry
go.
is good.
Dry
Is good.
word.
Yes.
Yeah,
Dry
that
is-
works.
Also
Yes.
because it goes before the word martini, which is another happy thing in the world. So.
I have to say, Ashley, the number of times I literally laughed out loud while reading the book.
Yeah.
My husband was like, "What are you reading? Isn't that a business book?" I was like, "Yeah, but it's written by Ashley, so it's amazing."
If you like what you heard today, check out our RedThread Research membership. We have a wonderful community. We have studies and research that we publish on a range of people practices as well as HR technology. And we also have discussions on a regular basis, including virtual meetups and all sorts of other things to get you connected to the insights you need to solve your biggest people problems. Check us out at members.redthreadresearch.com.
Yeah, I actually even dog-eared a couple of pages because they were so good.
Which ones? Can you tell us? Or is it a secret?
One was when you're describing the performance management process. Can I just read it? Because it's awesome. Requiring people to write down their goals, often in some acronym encumbered format, when they already have a pretty good idea of what their job is and what needs to be done, is infantilizing. Performance reviews are such a strange mishmash of legalistic form filling and low fidelity historical reenactment. I thought that was brilliant. I loved it.
Legalistic form filling and low fidelity historical reenactment is
That's exactly what
that
they
was a
are.
gift of a phrase.
It was awesome.
Well, maybe we should tell our audience what we're talking about. So, for those of you who are listening in, we are so thrilled to be joined by Ashley Goodall, who has this week released a new book called The Problem with Change. I actually have it right here.
I also have my
So that I can, see, we both have it. Referenceable. As you heard, it is funny, but more importantly, it is an insightful, thoughtful, and thought-provoking piece. And at some points, Ashley, I think it's a little bit, I don't know if rebellious is the right word. What's like the Trojan horse? Like it seems like on the face, maybe not quite as, I'm struggling for the right words. I'm now, of course, trying to find old small words. But you think that it doesn't seem quite so, what's the word, Danny? Like against the grain,
Yeah. The phrase that kept on coming to mind as I was reading through it is like, there are clearly no sacred cows. You ripped pretty much everything apart. The way that we handle people and organizations, you took it down to its bare bones and told the truth about it. And I thought that was really brave, first of all, but also really interesting. Like it gave us a new point of view about the things that we do research on and how maybe we should be doing it differently, at least for me.
Yeah. For me too. I was at an event this week, and Ashley, you'll feel very proud. Somebody was talking about the importance of meaning and purpose. And I said, well, what do you actually mean about with that? What does it mean? And how do you create meaning if people don't understand the context? And why are you trying to make it inspirational? And I did, though, turn and give you credit. I said, if this sounds odd, it's coming from my friend Ashley.
The credit or blame.
Oh right. Now I'm the cover for you sounding odd, Stacia.
Credit.
Okie dokie. I guess I'm going to be busy then. Wow.
People who know me will know that that's nobody else gets to take credit for my oddness. So anyway, so we are thrilled to have you with that introduction. Ashley, for those of you who don't know you as well as we do, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself and your background and what brought you to writing this book?
Yes, I'm Ashley. I have a sardonic or dry wit, and I'm now apparently unemployable because I've said a whole bunch of things in a book.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So hallelujah. And also I'm the person who's called on when Stacia feels she needs to explain something that she said in a meeting. More seriously, I've spent, goodness me, 20 years in HR in various roles. I've done learning, I've done leadership stuff, I've done performance management. I've tried to create a way of doing performance management that is not a low fidelity historical reenactment. I spent 6 years at Cisco as an SVP of HR there, figuring out things to do with leadership and teams and data and how you measure things. And I left Cisco in order to write this book. This has been my day job for the last getting on for 3 years. And this week is lovely because other people finally get to see it and get to tell me precisely what they think of it, good, bad, and indifferent. So that's who I am and how I show up here.
So now tell us why people should listen to you.
I find that a very difficult question to answer because I don't think anyone necessarily should listen to me. To be in my innermost soul, I'm like, I don't know. Why would you listen to me? I think you'd listen to me if you find something that I say fresh or interesting, or you think I'm the sort of person who does his homework and has gone to the research and gone to the data and gone to the evidence, or you think I'm doing a reasonably good job of standing up for some people whose experience at work is kind of written off, if you like. So I suppose those would be the reasons. But I think the bottom of all of those is I'm not sure anyone should listen to me, but I love it if people would.
There you go.
As always, thoughtful and honest. Let's dive in. The book is called The Problem with Change.
Uh-huh.
So, Ashley, what's the problem with change?
Well, the funny thing is about change that we teach leaders that it's a good thing. And we have other words for it, by the way. It's not always called change. Sometimes we talk about transformation. Sometimes we talk about disruption. Sometimes we talk about reinvention. There are all of these sort of new, different words. And, you know, when the way we talk about them, we sort of signal to leaders that this is the job. When I was years and years ago at business school in a leadership class, the professor said, the fundamental role of a leader is to create change. That's what we sent you there to do. That's sort of where we enter into the topic. It's a good thing. It's up and to the right. I started writing this book by interviewing people around the world and saying very simply, tell me your stories of organizational change. And lots of people told me stories of like miserable things. And they were stories of ongoing change, endless change, things cascading down from above, a reorg, a merger, a spin-off, a new leader, a new team, a new strategy, a new process, a new technology, and blah, 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 blah. But there were also stories of people who were having trouble doing their jobs because of all of this. And that would be a problem. We are teaching leaders or encouraging leaders or praising leaders or rewarding leaders to do a thing that makes it hard for their employees to do their work. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's a problem. And that's what the book is an exploration of. And it explores sort of how did we wind up here and why is change hard on people and what should we do instead? And it's my attempt to reason from the humans out into the organization and say, listen, if you want to help people do their jobs, you have to understand the conditions of human performance. So we can start there and then we can begin to understand a little bit about how we might do some of this company stuff better.
So I have a question. I don't remember if it was on the last podcast that we did or if it was in the chit chat before. But when you first told us, I'm going to write a book about change and the challenges or the problems with it. Obviously, the name had not been formed or any of the rest of that. The first thought in my head was, one, if Ashley's writing it, I think it'll be good. So like all the initial, no, I'm not just really am saying this because honestly, if somebody else had told me they were writing a book about change, I'd be like, another book about change? Why?
Yeah.
Why? But I immediately discarded that thought because I was like, if Ashley's going to write something, I think it's going to be good. But then the second thought that occurred to me was we are in the midst of some of the biggest change with technology in particular and AI. And like, wow, that's pretty bold to basically be like, all the things everybody's saying you got to do, there's a problem with them. So as you were conceiving of this book, what were you thinking? Did this thought cross your mind?
Ashley, are you out of your mind?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. I just felt I had to do it. I don't know. There's a little bit of pure intent in the middle of all of that. I have spent my career trying to make work better for people. And there's a big bad wolf at the door. And the wolf is we're addicted to change and we're not looking at it hard enough. I don't know. I honestly felt I had to say it. Somebody sent me an email a couple of days ago that mentioned AI, by the way, and said, oh my goodness me, when the AIs start talking to one another, which apparently is the next AI thing and it's just around the corner, then we're going to need all this stuff in your book even more. We're actually going to need to understand stability and we're going to need to understand human performance even more because it's not going to get less, the change. It's going to keep going and it's going to start talking to itself and feeding on itself. So I don't know, but I wrote it. This might be just a very bad answer, by the way, or a very bad reason to have taken 3 years of life. But I wrote it because I thought it needed to be said.
I'm kind of with Stacia, like another book on change. Does anybody else need to talk about it? We're living it, right? But you took a really human approach to it. I was really surprised after I got through your first couple of chapters that it's all about the human. It's not about all of the technology that we're facing. It's all about the human. And in fact, you list 5 problems with change. I'm just going to read them from your book, so you don't have to quote them. The problem of uncertainty, the problem of lack of control, the problem of belonging, the problem of displacement, and the problem of loss of meaning. And you give several case studies at the beginning of a book that walks through these people going through really horrendous change. And how at the end of that, several of them said, oh no, but change is good. Like after all of this terrible stuff had happened to them, they're like, no, change. That's like the new frontier. It's good. So my question to you is, the problem of uncertainty and the lack of control are kind of understandable. The problem of unbelonging and displacement are a little bit more nuanced. Help us understand those a little bit.
It's maybe a words thing, but I think actually belonging, unbelonging is something that's very, very intuitive to us all because we all feel it. And it's to say that humans form social groups and the social groups we form are massively important to our psychological health, our sense of our own identity, even our cognitive process is shaped by our social group. So the way we think is socially mediated. Okay, that's really interesting. What's the first thing you do in a reorg? You change all the social groups at work. So I've spent a large part of my career getting really curious about teams because I think they're fascinating and I think they're magical. And I also think they're quite annoying for a lot of people the whole time. And so something that has that sort of bivalent nature is really interesting. But one thing that a team gives to us all at work is a sense of belonging. And that is a source of massive, massive, massive stability from how do I get my work done? Well, we're all engaged in a complicated project and I can't do all of it myself because I don't have all the skills. But luckily, my teammate can do this bit and I can do this bit. And together we can do a thing that neither of us could have done alone. That whole is greater than sum of the parts thing. That's team. But also stuff like gossip, for goodness sake, which is a beautiful and really important human thing. And also, by the way, is a little bit ambiguous in terms of its sort of value. Do we really want to encourage people to gossip? Well, whether we encourage them or not, they're going to gossip, and the gossip will cement social structures. And that's a lovely thing. I think, by the way, this is massively sidebar-y, but I think one of the great losses that we all began to feel in the pandemic was gossip. Gossip had gone away. or gossip was a lot harder to get to because you had to type it all into the chat room versus just sort of running into somebody at the water cooler. We're not going to the water cooler for innovation. We're going for gossip. And it's really important. So there's belonging. You asked about displacement. I got really interested in the science of place. And there are people who study something called place attachment. And place is a thing at work. We now go to offices and we have locations where we do work, and humans get attached to places. But it got really interesting for me when I started discovering the connection between ritual and place, and the fact that our habits are a mechanism by which we grow attached to a place, because it's where I do this, or it's where I do this, or increasingly it's where we do this. So the connection between ritual and place. And again, when you reassign everybody's offices or move people from one building to another, you at the same time disrupt all the rituals that are attached with that place. Or when you do a reorg or a transformation or a new leader or whatever, you shred a lot of rituals. And those are a source of stability again for people. And we need our stability in order to do our best work. So all of these different facets of a human, the need for certainty, the need for control, the need for social groups, the power of social groups, the need for a sense of place, the need for ritual, they're all the foundation of us showing up at work and being useful. And the funny thing is, we all want to be useful. Well, all. I don't know. I meet very few people who don't want to be useful, who don't get frustrated if they can't do their work. So it seems to me that all of this stuff, and Danny, you said reasoning from the human out, this is sort of explaining what that feels like in the book. But this is massively important, I think, for how we understand the workplace and how we design the workplace.
One of the things that struck me as I was reading the book about that part in particular was the whole open office concept, right? And how lacking in place and hot desks and all these things that have become a thing, how that just basically takes a stake to the heart of place, even though you're still going to a place.
So the funny thing about open office is it actually illustrates another point here, I think, which is that who asked for open office? Did any of the employees, did they sign a petition saying, I want to sit at a long table with headphones on, trying to desperately block out the sounds of all the other people sitting at the long table with headphones on? Who asked for that? Employees did not ask for this. Employees really don't like this. If you go to most people and say, can I design a workspace for you, please? They go, thank you. It features a door. It features a door. Anything else I don't recap. Just give me a door, because I want to think. The reason people don't want to come back to the office is their home office has got a door. And it doesn't have a lot of background noise in it at the same time. So we did open office because it's economical. You can get more people in fewer square feet. It's like the ever-decreasing sizes of seats in airplanes. You can fit more people in, and therefore the bottom line looks a little better. But it's not designed to help people work. And they weren't asked. Once you realize some of the things that I'm talking about, sooner or later, you've got to ask people what they want, and you've got to listen to what they tell you. Not because our job is to make people happy, although that's a good thing, but because our job is to help people do work. That's what we're in the business of.
Well, let's kind of evolve on that concept of, you mentioned, make people happy. That often is connected to this idea of meaning. When we've written about meaning, and many others, we've talked a lot about people having a sense of this work is meaningful to me because it aligns to my values and such. And we, even on the podcast, have had some firms, some of which were mentioned in your book, to come and talk about meaning and the connection that they try to make between the work that people do and the purpose of the business and all that stuff. One of the things that really struck me was that you were thinking about meaning in a somewhat different way. Can you explain what that means for you?
It comes from the scientific literature, by the way. If you start looking for the science of meaning, the first meaning of meaning that you run across is whether things make any sense. It's coherence. It's hang-togetherness of the world around us. And you realize after a while that if things don't make any sense at all, they can't make a particular sense. Like, we can't be uplifted by the mission of our organization if we can't figure out what the mission is. The science will tell you that the hang-togetherness, the coherence of our world is so important to us that when it's taken away in one place, we go find it in another. We go look for it someplace else. We have a very strongly hardwired need that things make sense. Not so much, actually, that they be uplifting, or rather, not that they be uplifting according to what somebody else thinks is uplifting. This is the wonderful conundrum of what are known as dirty jobs. You look at the trash collector and go, how could you possibly think that that contains purpose? Because I don't think it contains purpose. But you look and you can find somebody who goes, for me, my purpose is to help people live their lives, whatever. The point is that there are two ingredients to meaning. One is that things make sense, which, by the way, we shred every time we do a change thing. So that's the problem with change and meaning. But the other is that purpose is emergent. I need to find my own. You can't tell me what mine should be. And sure as hell, you can't tell me to feel uplifted by the one that you've decided my company should have, because that's weird. We don't work like that. We encounter the world and we go, do I understand what's going on here? Coherence. And is this something that speaks to me? And if it does, and then somebody says, does your work have meaning? We go, yes. But then unfortunately what happens is the person goes, that person's work had meaning. Okay, we should find out what their meaning is and tell everybody else to have the same meaning. And so we get statements of purpose that people roll their eyes at because it's not theirs. It's not emergent. It's not the thing that they've made for themselves.
I sat in an MBA class once where they took a bunch of companies' purpose and asked the students to align them with the companies. And it was a disaster. Like,
of course.
Most of them are so vague that you can't. Just to sum up what you said, I actually want to read this quote from your book. It said, so often our discussion of meaning skips right past the question of whether things make sense and instead whether whatever sense they do make is sufficient inspiration to us.
Yeah. And it's fascinating to look at the statements of purpose. They're attempts to lift our eyes and look towards daylight. I mean, those are lovely things. But when you try it and do it on behalf of someone else, you finish up in generic land really, really quickly. And so you can't match the purpose statement to the company. They're basically the same purpose statement. I mean, let's be really clear here. The company purpose statement says to do great things in the universe.
That's our company statement. Did you read that before?
Oh, I'm so sorry. You have a million different versions of that. And again, it's not bad to want to do great things in the universe, but each of us has to find our own purpose. And our employers aren't massively important to that. They can't help with that.
It actually reminds me of one of the stories in your book of Alexander the Great, the tow truck driver, and how he, like, that whole story was so interesting to me because when I got to the end, I'm like, well, dude, he's got his purpose. It has very little to do with driving the truck and so much more to do with making people's day better, which I thought was really interesting. Like, I'm sure.
Really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So for listeners, we should probably recap a little bit of Alexander the Great. I won't do too much because it's such a beautiful, beautiful story. And it's like one of those little nuggets and I've been carrying it around for a little while. But my car broke down and had to be towed, and the phone went, and the person said, this is Alexander the Great. And I said, why am I talking to an ancient Macedonian king? And he said, because I'm actually not an ancient Macedonian king. I'm the tow truck driver. And he came and put the car on the truck, and blah, 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 and I got into the cab, and we were driving. And I said, why are you called Alexander the Great? And he described for me, I'll leave that for people to discover, but he described to me why he was Alexander the Great. And it had, to your point, Danny, in the end, it started with how to put cars on trucks and being a tow truck driver. And it finished with something that was a very, very, very long way from that, but was so visceral for him and so immediate and so humble and so straightforward and so darn real that I finished up with like green-eyed envy. It's like, gosh, we at work, especially in big companies, don't have that sense of clarity. And we don't wander around affixing the great to the end of our names without feeling that we'll be judged or we'll be thought to be arrogant or whatever. And this guy was just like, I'm Alexander the Great because I'm really good at this. And he wasn't boasting, he was rejoicing. And we don't get a lot of rejoicing these days, it seems to me. Yeah, it was about his purpose, but it was very, very emergent. It wasn't, if you'd have written the purpose statement for the tow truck company, well, we know what it would have been. It would have been to do great things in the universe. But then there would have been some tow truck variant of that. It wouldn't have been his purpose. And it wouldn't have been his delight either.
I was reading this section on meaning and purpose, and then later reading the section on rituals and church in particular. For those of you who haven't yet read the book, Ashley talked about kind of how going to church can have different meanings for different folks, that even if you're not especially religious, that it can still have, the ritual of it can have a meaning. What struck me is something we've written about in our purpose research, which is that potentially part of the reason people are looking for so much more purpose in their work is the breakdown in, or at least lower attendance in church and in local social communities and the like. What struck me was how, I think there's not an argument against lower attendance that we can prove, but if you think about church, in many ways, church has said, our purpose is to do great things in the universe. But we'll have these rituals and kind of leave it to you to, in many ways, interpret that as appropriate. But in companies, in some ways, we're trying to force it down that level further, right? And maybe we just don't need to be doing that. Maybe what we need to just be doing is our purpose is to do great things in the universe, and you need to find the way that that fits for you into what you're trying to do. But I had never kind of thought of those parallels until I was reading through that section on ritual and church.
Really interesting. I would love it if a few more leaders would say, my purpose is this, yours is more than I should opine on. Mm-hmm. I think a little bit of humility in purpose land would be a very healthy thing and would make people a lot more real, to be honest. But I love that connection, Stacia, between church and ritual and the sort of bowling alone thing. Yeah. And pretty soon, adjacent to that conversation is something about social media and phones and screens. And the fascinating thing about rituals is that they make activities outside the ritual more meaningful for the people who did the ritual. There's an overspill. And if I go and do some ritual that might not say this ritual exists because meaning of X, but just says we're doing a ritual. This is a ritual. They're weird things, but if they work, they feel meaningful. And then the thing that you go do afterwards also feels meaningful. And that is separate from whether you can write down in words the meaning. That's the point, really. That meaningfulness isn't a sentence, it's a feeling. And because we're sort of very literal, we're like, well, it's a feeling, we should be able to write it down and read it out to everybody. And 3 seconds later, you're at do great things in the universe again. But I actually think there's a theme in all of this stuff about humility and humility as leaders and humility as students of humans and what we're like and how we tend to go and sort of fascination with all of those things. And I think ritual is another place. We're very careless about rituals because we blow them up without thinking very hard about it. But very often those are the source of meaning for people, even though you can't necessarily write down what that meaning is. And I think that duality, source of meaning and can't write it down, is also fascinating and beautiful and uplifting in some way.
I want to talk about one more thing before we go to the lightning round. And this was maybe one of the favorite phrases that I'll remember. And that's what you called a SKUman to human, or human, if I'm saying it more properly. Can you tell our audience what that means? And in particular, I was really fascinated by the connection to enterprise technology, because we do a lot of work on enterprise technology.
Well, so maybe we can start with the enterprise technology end and sort of work our way from there. But it is a really interesting question to go, what characteristics of humans do we capture in our technologies at work? And what do those things, what does that list, what's on it and what's not on it, tell us about how we think about people at work? And of course, we all know the sorts of things we put in enterprise technology, especially on the people side. We like to put in your date of birth so that we can have the AI send you a birthday greeting, which is lovely, I'm sure. We like to put in when you were hired, how much we pay you, your social stuff, the benefits, all of those sort of demographic things, your degrees, your certifications, your qualifications, all of those things. We do not put in our systems things like what amuses you, or what makes you smile, or that weird thing that you love to do other people's spreadsheets for them because you're a spreadsheet geek, or the fact that you love baking and will happily bake for the team if asked to, or the fact that you've never met a meeting that you didn't mind being late for, or any of all the human stuff. What we write down is the cogs in a machine stuff. And I was looking for a way to describe people at work if we think they are interchangeable and emotionless. And I'm like, well, in a retail business, you have things called SKUs, and they are stock keeping units. And, they have a set of characteristics, how much it cost, where it is in the store, how many we sold last week, what the price is, what the margin is, blah, 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 blah. So we have that. We do the same for humans. So we don't really see humans, we see SKUmans. And the SKUmans have a certain set of characteristics, and we write them down in our software system. And when we're disappointed with that particular SKUman, we either cancel them by showing them the door, or we try and upgrade them by doing a skills assessment and having the thing say, here are the skills you need to do your job, and you don't have them, so please click the following buttons and listen to the following video feeds, and then you will have acquired those skills, and then we can upgrade you in the SKUman tracking system, and then we can deploy you against this other thing over here. And it's just all massively inhuman, which is not to say that those things are wrong. They're just super insufficient as a way of capturing a human at work. And the fact that we're not massively curious about how might we capture a human at work is a little bit depressing to me. And so one of the things I'm trying to argue for is, how can we do better at understanding what you're like at work and what tickles you and what distracts you, and how are you offering your best to other humans? I think we capture a bunch of extrinsic demographic stuff and not really anywhere in our software the answer to the question, why did you show up today? Mm-hmm. And that seems to be an important one to know the answer to.
Yeah, agreed. Let's move over to our lightning round. The lightning round, for those of you who might be new listeners, is just a chance to get to know Ashley a little bit better, not just through the lens of his work SKUman values. I think we've got just 3 today. Going to launch into this first one, Ashley. Ashley, if you could be one age for the rest of your life, what age would you choose?
That's a completely impossible question. By the way, I assume because it's the lightning round, I can't take 5 minutes to answer this.
No,
quickly. Okay, this age right now.
That's a good answer.
Because I'm still learning. So if you had to freeze me, I'd want to be frozen at most learning inserted in me.
Okay. What about, would you rather be called unfunny or unattractive, and why?
These are very hard questions. This is like, would you rather be hit with a stick or a mallet? And the answer is neither an option? No, apparently not. I would rather be called unattractive, because if you told me my humor was gone, then that would be very, 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 very much sad for the me of it.
I have to completely agree with you. I would rather be ugly than a bore.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%.
Or monotonous.
Yes.
Oh, please. No.
All right. If you could have dinner with someone you've never met, dead or alive, who would it be?
Gustav Mahler.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. For those of us who don't know, tell us.
Austrian composer, late 19th, early 20th century, wrote 9 symphonies, said famously a symphony must contain the world, and then actually 10 times, because there's a symphony that he didn't number, but there are really 10 symphonies. So 10 times wrote a symphony that contained the world. They're magnificent, and my life would be massively poorer without them. And I would love to sit down with Gustav Mahler and go, how the hell did you do that? How? Where did that come from? I think they're mysteriously awesome. In that mysterious, because I don't understand how a human could do that. The awesome is not mysterious to me at all. You just listen and you are transported by this music. Transported. So, Gustav Mahler.
All right. We're going to have to listen. Last year, I took my kids, who are 6 and 8, to Beethoven's Ninth as their very first symphony at the San Francisco Symphony. And yes, transformed.
You started at a pretty high peak then.
I did. It was also MTT, who's the famous.
Yeah.
It was one of his last.
Oh my God.
Conductings, and like Nancy Pelosi was in the audience. I'm going to have a hard time topping it. But maybe Mahler, maybe.
You know what I discovered this week? The day that this book was published was the 200th anniversary of the world premiere of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony.
Really?
Yes. I'm like, oh, that was very nice of them to publish my little book on that important day. But there you go. 200 years ago, that thing. Still shocking in how it makes you feel.
Yeah, for sure.
And what it challenges you to think about. We'd do a whole other podcast on Beethoven and Mahler. We probably shouldn't right now, but I don't know.
Let's jump forward. We've talked about the problems with change, which, according to your book, there are many. But luckily, that only took up half your book. The other half is on what we do about it now. So nutshell it for us. What do we do about it now?
What we need is a thing called stability. So it would be foolhardy to say we should not have change because, frankly, we don't really get to choose the whole time. We can't command the tide not to come in. It's coming anyway. Now, I think we can have a lot less change because we are not aware of the downsides of change that we've been discussing for the last half hour, because we don't have clear visibility into all of that and the consequences. We're a little bit, hey, this will be good, we'll change everything. So I think we're a little careless with how much we instigate. But that said, while the number of, the changeometer might be at 11 right now, if we want to do the Spinal Tap scale of things where everything goes to 11. So we're at 11 on change right now. I think 5 or 6 is probably the place the world would have us live if we were sensible about the consequences of change. You finish up going, well, 5 or 6, that's still change. And that still will create uncertainty, unbelonging, displacement, lack of meaning, all of these other things. So what are you going to do about that? I think what we need to get very smart about stability. There are people, of course, who've written an awful lot about a thing called change management. I think we need to get very good at something I would call stability management. How do you create stability for people at work? And there are lots of different ways to do it. I've suggested several of them in the book, but they all have a sort of common thread, which is, again, understand what people need to do their best work and find out ways to consistently give it to them. And whether that's coherent and stable teams, or whether that's the ability to grow their abilities and become more like Alexander the Great, or whether that's space to express their own volition and their own intent and thereby increase their agency, or whether that's what we were talking about last time I was chatting to you too, and we were recording ourselves, whether that's real words that actually define reality for people. There are all sorts of different things we can do, but the thrust of all of that is you can have stability. It's not stasis. It's not standing still. It's movement, but it's movement in a stable, controlled way. And that's what we need to get really good at doing.
Okay. So I was just picturing like an escalator. It's not crazy. You're still moving, but you're also...
Yes.
Is that kind of...
Escalator. Yeah. Yeah. You're going up and to the right, especially if you're standing at the bottom to the left of it. It's going up and to the right. There's a measuredness. And right now, the work escalator is going in 82 different directions, and every 4 seconds somebody mashes the big red button at the bottom and stops the thing, and everyone falls over, and then they mash it again and everyone gets thrown back in a different direction. So yeah, I like the escalator's good. That works.
So one of the stories that jumped out at me was about JP Morgan Chase's pistols. So I'm a historian. I think you know that. You're a musician by training. I'm a historian by training, and particularly focused on from the exploration to the Civil War. So this is right in the heart of the things that I love and care about. So for those who don't know about the pistols, can you tell them what they are and what we can learn from them?
Did you know about the pistols, historian?
I did know about the pistols.
You did know, and did you know where they were?
I didn't know they were there.
Okay.
I knew about the pistols. I knew about the founding of the bank. I did not know that they still owned the pistols and had them somewhere.
Okay. It's interesting. So the JP Morgan Chase pistols are the pistols that were used in the duel between Burr and Hamilton in Weehawken in 17 and a bit, long time ago, now playing on Broadway, blah, 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 blah. The actual pistols. Weirdly, obviously there are two. They are dueling pistols. You need two pistols to have a duel. Otherwise, it's a little bit unfair.
One might argue it was a little unfair anyway.
Yeah, well, yes. And no one knows who had which pistol, but one was fired harmlessly in the air by Hamilton, and the other was fired lethally at Hamilton by Burr and led to the demise of Alexander Hamilton. By a strange chain of corporate M&A, essentially, extending a couple of centuries, they finish up in the possession of JP Morgan Chase. And I saw them when I was a little baby consultant, and I was going to a meeting in the executive suite at Chase Manhattan Plaza, it was back then. And we were standing outside waiting to be ushered into this magnificent office. And I was like, what are those things? Why have they got guns? It's a bank. And somebody said, well, turned into the Manhattan Water Company, which chased Manhattan. It's the Manhattan-y thing. And we've got the pistols. And then they said, stop asking stupid questions. We've got a meeting to go to. And so I was just like, okay, it's a bank. They have pistols, whatever. And then I came to write about what makes belonging. And I went back to the pistols because it struck me that they were sitting in a display case on the executive floor of JP Morgan Chase, and no one knew they were there. And so there was sort of this weird little secret. And it wasn't no one can know. It was just we don't really tell people about this. And I started thinking about other things that are secret-ish that we don't really tell people. But when we do tell them, we invite them in. And you're now in the know because we've told you a little bit about our history or the time when or how we do this funky thing. And it suddenly occurred to me that belonging is about making people feel in, not out. And in many human situations in the world, you belong because we've told you our secrets. And that was suddenly just a little moment of magic. We, of course, at work, try and make people belong by sending them to a thing called orientation, which contains many statements of the order, we're here to do great things in the universe, and not very many things that feel like little secrets. I actually don't know whether if you now were hired by JP Morgan Chase and went to orientation, somebody would say, guess what we've got upstairs? We've got murder weapons. I don't think people would say that. It would be delightful if they did, because then you'd go, oh, I've been brought into something. And values, aspirations, purpose don't weirdly make you feel like you're on the inside. Secrets do. And we all, again, teams have these things. We just sort of forget to mention them. But they're enormously powerful, and they help create affiliation and belonging.
I love this idea of secrets creating affiliation and belonging. I think it's great. I think one of the challenges that Stacia has definitely written about, and I've definitely talked about, is a lot of times those secrets are held. You know what I mean? Information doesn't flow freely within organizations. And so some people are in and some people are out. So how do you balance that sort of like, hey, you're one of us now, with the possibility of keeping people out because they're not in the know?
I think it's just the characteristic of the mechanism. So I'm sort of saying, hey, listen, there's a mechanism for belongingness and share secrets. Now, Of course, as soon as you can create belongingness, you're at the same time creating unbelongingness for all the people you haven't created belongingness for. So as soon as you create an in-group, you create an out-group. I'm just saying there's a mechanism. You want to create belonging on your team? Share some secrets. Don't publish them because then they're no longer secrets. It doesn't work that way. But share some secrets. And I think the trick is realize that you have these things. I mean, they used to be called war stories. It's a similar sort of vibe. I found some researchers in the book who've researched family stories. Sort of works the same way, that families who are really good at telling stories about when mum and dad were growing up or what happened years and years and years ago have more psychologically stable kids. We can do this. And obviously, if I create a really good sense of family in my family, I'm also helping the other families not be part of my family. So yes, it's the in and the out necessarily come together, the yin and the yang of belonging, if you like. But I'm pointing to a mechanism that I think is wonderful and natural, and we could be more deliberate about and would help build stability into the working world.
Okay. You've mentioned teams throughout this podcast. And in the book, you recommend that people focus mostly on teams. So talk a little bit about that.
If you want a home for stability in an organization, start with the teams. I think that's the bottom line. You realize that there are all these mechanisms. So we just talked about secrets. Well, where are you going to be doing the secret sharing? I think on a team is a fabulous place because a team will have a meaningful sort of history if it's been around for a little time, and we'll have some fun stories to tell. And so a team is a lovely home for secrets. A team is a home for rituals. Goodness me, how many team rituals do we have? Not all of them, but lots of them are created and executed with delight and giggling by teams. If you want to figure out how to become more like Alexander the Great and more aware of your efficacy, a team is a lovely, possibly the only place where you're going to get that sense, because your teammates can tell you what you did that was useful and what they in turn went and did with it. If you want to find the home for meaning in the sense of not do great things in the universe, but in terms of, did my work make a difference? Did I do good today in my way that I defined? That's going to be mirrored by the people on your team. That's where you're going to find that. So all of these things point to, we're social creatures. We derive belonging, meaning, sense of impact, sense of identity, all the stability things. We derive them from our teams, which is, hallelujah, teams, great. And the first thing out the door in the change initiative is all the teams. It takes a long time to know all these things. It takes a while to discover the secrets. It takes a while to discover what the other people can do. It takes a while to arrive at a sense of impact and where our work fits in. These are all things that we build for ourselves slowly, deliberately, resiliently, carefully, lovingly. And then someone shows up on a Monday morning and goes, yeah, we got bored with the old way of doing stuff, so here's the new way, and upends all of that. If you are seeking a theory as to why people seem so miserable at work at the moment, why we're seeing employee activism, why we're seeing unionization, why we're seeing quiet quitting, lazy girl jobs, coffee badging, all of the different names that we have for I'm doing the minimum. Sure, look at constant change and disruption, but look inside that at how many teams get turned on their heads every day. And I think there's a lot of explanation there.
So let's get to what HR should do for just a moment. I realized that the word I was searching for earlier, you used actually in one of the final chapters, which was called radicalize HR. And I think what I was trying to say earlier was that what you are advocating for is a sort of surreptitious radicalization. It's taken me an hour to get to that one phrase. But there it is. So the secret radicalization really is a lot of what I feel like is in here on the face, what you just said, teams are where so much happens. Yeah, I don't think anybody would disagree. But what you said underneath that, We are disrupting teams, and we are basically laying waste to all the anchors that individuals have created that create stability for them when we do this. Like, that is a fairly radical statement. And I think you're right. Let's talk about, just for a moment, because I know we're close to time, you say we need to radicalize HR. What's that mean?
So we can do the literal meaning of radical, which comes from Latin meaning root. So go back to the roots. And the roots of HR, it's right there in the name, human. So I'm arguing that HR needs to be the advocate for all the stuff that we've been talking about. And that at the moment, HR is a little bit stuck betwixt and between, because on the one hand, we look at the people and we go, they don't seem universally cheerful. But on the other hand, we're looking at the business, and the business is going, yeah, well, sorry, we really need to do the layoff, or we need to do the transformation, or we need to do the reorg, or we need to do what the consultants told us we need to do. And your job, HR, is to execute the people-related bits of the business strategy, and here they are, so get on with it. And HR is sort of like, okay, well, we know who pays our salary, but at the same time, we think this is not going to end well. And at the same time, we think you guys are a little bit short-term focused and someone needs to be longer-term focused. And at the same time, we can read the engagement survey. And we know that things are trending down and to the left, not up and to the right. So what should we do? And what I'm saying is, in a sort of analogous way to the way that marketing functions have reinvented themselves in the last few years, by getting really good data and being the most smart people about the customer and what they need. The HR's role is to get really good data and be the most smart people and the proudest advocates for the employees. And the HR should be the people who understand the experience on the front lines best. HR should be the people who understand what it's like to live in an organization on a daily basis. And HR should appoint itself the custodian of stability in an organization. They should be the, not quite the escalator mechanics, but the people who make sure the escalators keep running and will run eternally and will run irrespective of which leaders are trying to mash the red emergency stop button. That's the role that not only employees want HR to play, but the business should ask HR to play that role as well. And the business should kind of demand it, because that is where long-term prosperity comes from. That's where long-term goodness comes from. It struck me years and years and years ago that if you want to plan for a year, you do an operational plan. And if you want to plan for 3 years, you do a strategic plan. But if you want to plan for 10 years, you do a people plan. Because that's the only thing you know is going to be there in 10 years' time. So long-term planning is people planning. Long-term investment is investment in people. And HR should be absolutely on the front lines of advocating for all of that. And that's radical, by the way, because that takes us back to the roots of an organization. Why is it an organization? Because there are people coming together to do what no one could do by themselves. Okay, well, we better make sure they can do it, and we're not stopping them from doing it.
Absolutely.
Well, our time has come, Ashley. We need to wrap up. So we're going to ask you 2 more questions, and then we'll talk to you next time you write a book. Actually, hopefully before then. As you think back over all of the things that you learned in writing this book, what is your 1 15-second takeaway? Sum it all up.
Organizations need to be a platform for human contribution, and they're not today.
Beautiful. Now we're going to engage in our ritual on this podcast. One thing we do at the end of every single podcast, which is we ask people about their purpose. Now, you've been with us before, so you've already answered this question writ large, so I slightly altered it. I don't know if that messes up ritual. Does that mess up ritual? It might.
No.
Anyway.
Well,
No.
So the funny thing is, as long as we can recognize it as an instance of the same thing, you still get credit.
Okay, it is an instance of the same thing. Thank you. I feel better. So, how has your purpose changed as a result of writing this book?
I think it's become more distilled. Like, all the stuff I've been talking about seems to me to be more important and more urgent than it did when I started this. The reaction to the book, and we're in very early days, but the reaction to the book from the people on the front lines has been, thank you for saying this. Thank you for saying these things. Thank you for starting this conversation. And in a way, I feel like it's been a gift to me to be able to say this and to be able to write these things and to be able to get this out in the world. And I sort of feel that whatever happens now, that this is what I'm going to be doing for the next long while. And that feels great.
Ashley, thank you for joining us on Workplace Stories.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the RedThread research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.